Stick to your bandages, sweetheart. The big guns are for the big boys. A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the line of SEAL candidates, the sound sharp and brittle in the dry desert air. The instructor, Senior Chief Thorne, stood with his arms crossed, a monument of muscle and condescension, his words echoing across the sniper range. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her eyes, calm and gray as a winter sea, remained fixed downrange, her small frame a stark contrast to the hulking M210 enhanced sniper rifle she held. She was listed on the day's roster as a medic, a support role temporarily attached to the unit for a cross-training exercise. To Thorne, she was a box to be checked, an administrative burden who had no business touching what he considered a sacred instrument of war. Her silence seemed to fuel his arrogance. He saw weakness, hesitation, an outsider in a world of wolves. But from the observation tower, the base commander saw something else entirely. Not the medic's pouch on her belt, but the way her thumb rested against the rifle stock, a position taught in only one, very specific, very quiet unit. He saw a discipline that predated Thorne's own career, a stillness that was not empty, but full. If you believe that true strength is measured in action, not words, type proven in the comments below. The humiliation was designed to be a spectacle. Thorne walked the line, his voice a booming indictment of her presence. He tapped the scope with a thick finger. This isn't a thermometer, document. You can't just point it and hope for the best. This requires instinct. It requires aggression. It requires a killer's mindset, not a healer's. He gestured to the targets shimmering in the heat 1,000 meters away, steel silhouettes that mocked the uninitiated. The young SEALs, eager to earn his approval, shuffled their feet, their gazes alternating between the ground and the woman who had become the object of their instructor's scorn. Still, she remained a statue of professional calm. Her movements were economical, devoid of any wasted energy. She adjusted the bipod, her hands gliding over the rifle's chassis with an unnerving familiarity. There was no defiance in her posture, no anger in her eyes. There was only a quiet, methodical process. This lack of reaction was, to Thorne, the ultimate insult. It was as if his words, his very presence, were irrelevant data points in a much larger calculation she was performing. He was noise, she was signal. He was a storm on the surface, while she was the crushing pressure of the deep, a silence more profound and more powerful than any shout he could muster. The exercise was called the Cold Bore Gauntlet. It was a test of both skill and mental fortitude, designed to break even seasoned operators. The target was a 10-inch plate at 1,100 meters, but the scenario was complicated by shifting wind variables and a hostage-taker silhouette placed just inches to the right. A single shot. No warm-up, no sighters. The challenge was meant to be a crowning achievement for the best candidate in the class. As Thorne barked the conditions, he smirked in her direction, making it clear this was her one and only chance to prove she belonged. She didn't respond. She simply settled behind the rifle, becoming an extension of the weapon. Her breathing slowed, each exhale a measured release of pressure, her heartbeat a steady, metronomic rhythm against the unforgiving earth. She wasn't just looking through the scope, she was communing with the environment. She watched the dance of the mirage, felt the whisper of the wind on her cheek, processed the barometric pressure. The world didn't shrink to the target. It expanded to include every variable between her and that distant piece of steel. It was a language of physics and intuition, a conversation held in the silent spaces between heartbeats. The candidates held their breath. Thorne watched, arms crossed, a smug certainty on his face. He expected a miss, a humiliating failure that would validate his prejudice. He was waiting for the sound of steel ringing on the far berm, a sound that would affirm his worldview that competence was loud, aggressive, and exclusively male. He was waiting for the proof he was right. He was about to receive proof of something else entirely. The silence on the range became a physical entity. It was heavy, expectant, a vacuum waiting to be filled. And then, it was broken. Not by a deafening crack, but by a suppressed, sharp cough from the M210. The sound was clinical, almost surgical. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, more than a full second later, a faint but unmistakable ping echoed back from the target zone. But it wasn't just a hit. Through the spotting scopes, the image resolved into something impossible. The bullet hadn't just struck the 10-inch plate. It had punched a perfect hole through the dead center of the hostage-taker's head, a shot so precise, so audacious, that it defied the very parameters of the exercise. It was a statement. It wasn't a shot to hit a target. It was a shot to end a threat with zero collateral damage. It was the physical manifestation of absolute moral clarity and terrifying competence. The collective intake of breath from the SEAL candidates was the only sound. Thorne's jaw hung slack, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The color drained from his face as he stared downrange, his mind refusing to process what his eyes had just confirmed. "No," he whispered, the single word of surrender. No way. The arrogance that had defined him moments before had evaporated, replaced by a raw, hollow shock. The myth he had built around himself, the gatekeeper of an exclusive warrior class, had just been shattered by a single, perfectly placed round from the one person he had dismissed without a second thought. The commander's voice crackled over the range radio, calm and authoritative, cutting through the stunned silence. "Senior Chief Thorne, report to the tower." Now, as Thorne stumbled away, his face pale, the commander walked down onto the range, his boots crunching on the gravel. He didn't approach the line of awestruck SEALs. He walked directly to the silent medic, who was already methodically clearing her weapon as if she had done nothing more than complete a simple administrative task. The commander stopped before her, holding a tablet. He looked not at her, but at the file displayed on the screen, his expression one of deep, solemn respect. He didn't need to say a word to her. The validation was for everyone else. He turned to the assembled candidates, his voice ringing with an authority that Thorne's had always lacked. "You men are here to learn what it means to be a professional," he began, his gaze sweeping over their wide eyes. He tapped the tablet. "Let me introduce you to your new standard," he began to read, his words falling like hammer blows on the silence. "Call sign, Echo Unit, classified. Primary specialty, Special Operations Medic. Secondary specialty, Designated Marksman, Tier 1 Operations." The candidates straightened, their shock transforming into a palpable awe. 5 combat tours, all in non-permissive environments. Awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action after eliminating a high-value target at over 1,500 meters, while under direct fire, and simultaneously rendering aid to a wounded teammate. The commander paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Her file lists her as a medic because, officially, her unit doesn't exist. She is here for a routine skills refresh. The shot you just witnessed was not luck. It was a Tuesday. He looked from the file to the woman standing calmly before him. Then, in a gesture that sent a shockwave through the entire command, the base commander, a man who had led SEAL teams for 2 decades, brought his hand up in a slow, perfect salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with a reverence no one had ever heard from him before. "Welcome to our range. It is an honor." The story of the medic's shot became a legend before the sun had even set. It traveled on whispers through the barracks, on encrypted texts between firebases, on hushed phone calls to former teammates. It was a story that transcended gossip. It became a parable. It was told to new recruits as a lesson in humility. It was retold in bars where seasoned operators gathered, a reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you see last. Senior Chief Thorne was never the same. The loud, arrogant gatekeeper was gone, replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful instructor. The trainees who witnessed the event saw him approach Echo the next day, not with a challenge, but with a question. He held a logbook, pointing to a windage calculation, his voice low, respectful, the voice of a student seeking a master. He was asking her to explain the intricate details of her methodology. He had seen something beyond skill. He had seen an art form, and his ego had finally bowed to the pursuit of true excellence. The steel hostage-taker target was removed from the range. It wasn't scrapped. It was mounted on a solid oak plaque and hung in the main briefing hall, the tiny, perfect hole in its center a permanent monument to the day a medic taught an entire SEAL command the real meaning of the term quiet professional. It was a constant, silent reminder that assumptions are the enemy of survival. The legend of that day was not about gender or rank or specialty. It was about the immutable power of demonstrated competence. It was about the silence that speaks louder than any boast. Echo became a ghost, a standard whispered in the halls, a benchmark for excellence that elevated everyone. She never spoke of the event. She didn't have to. The plaque on the wall, the humbled instructor, the awe in the eyes of every new candidate who heard the story, they spoke for her. Her legacy was not in the shot itself, but in the culture it changed. She had proven, With one pull of the trigger, that respect is not something you can demand with a loud voice. It is something you command with quiet, undeniable, and breathtaking skill. A year later, a new class of SEAL candidates stood on that same range. Senior Chief Thorne, now a different man, pointed not to the targets downrange, but to the plaque hanging in the briefing hall they had just left. He spoke of humility, of the danger of underestimation, of the silent warriors who walk among us, their greatness hidden in plain sight. He told them the story of Echo, the medic whose fury was not in her voice, but in her precision. He taught them that the most important weapon they would ever have was not their rifle, but their ability to see past the uniform, to recognize competence in whatever form it appeared. He was passing on the lesson he had learned so painfully, ensuring that her silent action would echo for generations of warriors to come. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a record book. It's the standard that continues forward in the actions of others. It is the lesson that outlives the teacher. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.